Who was Takashi Nagai? He was a Japanese doctor who lived at the beginning of the last century. He converted to Catholicism after the encounter with the people of Urakami. He experienced several hard struggles during his life, including the atomic bomb in Nagasaki. Yet he lived all the events of his life as a call to find something to fulfill the urgency of his heart. He ultimately was in search for something that never dies, for eternity. And we'd like to begin by sharing a brief video to introduce you to Nagai. By Gabriele de Comite, who is the president of the Association of the Friends of Takashi Midori Nagai, who will be joining us by video from Japan. He is the official, the president of the official association for the, which is responsible for the promotion of the path to beatification of the Nagai couple. And he's translated several of Nagai's books from the original Japanese. Gabriele, as I mentioned, is based in Japan, in Tokyo, where he now works for a large pharmaceutical company. So we're going to start with Gabriele by video from Japan. He's going to talk to us about how Nagai experienced war and understood and lived peace in some of the most extreme circumstances that humankind has ever experienced.
The figure of Takashi Nagai is really a complex one. I think it's one of the most interesting yet complex figures of the last century. So, as it was said in the beginning, Takashi Nagai went through several struggles and pains during his life. One of them was at the beginning of his journey as a medical student, when he had just graduated, and he developed a very severe meningitis, which left him with a hearing deficit, a hearing loss, which prevented him from using the stethoscope, which means that he would not be able to become an internist and realize his great dream. And this is the first time when Nagai really has to face circumstances in life which are very different from what he was expecting. This is when he says, for the first time in his life, here he talks third person because this is how he wrote the biography, but everything refers to him. For the first time in his life, Takashi experienced that in face of an unexpected misfortune, a man's ambitions, plans, and dreams of glory can dissipate into thin air like a fleeting mirage that has no substance. He began to think that he had to choose a purpose for his life that was indestructible, invincible, and eternal. From that moment on, his motto became, "What is necessary is sufficient." This was the start of a journey for him, because this is a story of war and peace. It's a story of love and friendship. It's a story of faith, because we will talk about faith, because this is the source of all the energy of Takashi Nagai's heart. But above all, this is a story of a human journey. The journey that Takashi walks along his life is something which is possible to all of us. So this is why I would like you to introduce to the life of this guy, because this is a testimony for a possibility for all of us. This was the moment when he realized, and this is something he learned from the tradition of his culture, that everything in life, everything that we tend to hang to rely on, is destined to become nothing. Like cherry blossoms, beautiful, but just a gentle breeze is able to bring all the petals away. And that's the first moment when he realized, I need to find something which is invincible and eternal. At this point of his life, he starts learning for the first time about Christianity. So that's why he decides to move to Urakami, which was the northern district of the city of Nagasaki, where the Christians were living, the descendants of the hidden Christians. And he wanted to understand what Christianity was by living with them. He knew that the only possibility to test the Christian hypothesis, to understand if it was corresponding to truth, was to test it in experience. He wanted to live with them and see how faith was able to shape the life of people of everyday life. He meets the people from Murakami who become his new friends. He meets Midori, who will become his beloved wife. But in January 1933, he's called to participate to war in China, in Manchuria. Japan had occupied China for the first time. He leaves Nagasaki with this in his heart. Men's hopes are illusions, and his efforts vanity. That was the end of everything. Goodbye, Midori. Goodbye, Urakami. Goodbye, university. Goodbye, Nagasaki. It was all a dream. A rose-tinted dream. Farewell, youth. I will freeze in the snow of Manchuria, and nothing will remain of me. And what he sees during the war on the battlefield is really provoking to him. Every morning when he woke up, Takashi felt he could no longer have hope. The reason was that multitude of wounded soldiers before his eyes who could only feel at peace when they were sleeping. For whom, for what reason will these young people have to live their whole lives maimed? Takashi stood there looking at them and thought deeply. He needs to find a solution to the contradiction that he faces. His heart is shouting for eternity, for peace, for beauty, for happiness. Yet he's in face of horrible situation or horrible circumstances. So he needs to find something that puts together the contradictions that he's not able to solve within his mind and his heart. Many wise men from ancient times in search of the way, in search of the way, have retreated to live in the mountains. Others had wandered from village to village, and still others had tried to meditate while sitting under the mighty jet of a waterfall to mortify themselves. Takashi took up the study of the catechism. The truth that they had so unsuccessfully sought was clearly shown in that book. He's impressed how the simple words of that book, which he received from Midori while he was on the battlefield, were able to explain in simple words what real eternal life was. He was able to find there the only solution to all the struggles he had. That's why when he goes back to Nagasaki, he decides to get baptized. He takes the name Paolo, and to marry Midori. They start a new life together, and Midori will always be a reference point for him. He will always look at her. Without Midori, he would be Takashi Nagai. She was really like what he always was able to hang on in the worst moment of his life. And in 1933, he's called again to war for the second time. He goes to China. This is an actual picture of the first aid station that he was he had to lead, that he was building at the front at war. His job as a medical doctor was to literally take people from the battlefield where the bullets were coming, and just take those bodies and bring them to this station and rescue them. What is impressive in this second war is the way he faces things, the way he's able to stand as a fully human person. This is very different from the first war. Circumstances are the same. Actually, here are even worse. But he's a different person with a different self-consciousness because he has been baptized and he got married. So I want to underline a few things through his words of how he's able to face this very difficult reality. Every child I see reminds me of my children. Every woman I see reminds me of my wife, even though they speak a different language. He's talking about the Chinese enemies and wear different clothes. Are they not also the same as every Japanese, with the same goodness in their hearts and the same thoughts in their heads? This already gives us an idea of how he was able to look at people. And he does something which is incredible, because he even starts rescuing the enemies. He takes the Chinese and brings them to the hospital, to the Japanese hospital with them, and puts them side by side with the Japanese soldiers. Takashi and Sonoyama examined the wound on the soldier's thigh. He was a Chinese guy. Tied the artery with a silk thread to stop the bleeding. Applied tincture of iodine, gauze, and a splint. As he was being treated, the man screamed, crying out in pain. Hearing that voice and seeing those tears, Takashi wondered why he would kill what seemed to be a good man. Between me and him, he thought, there is no hatred. Why should the Japanese people and the Chinese people hate each other? In the first aid room of Takashi's squad, wounded soldiers from both armies, now far from the line of fire, lay side by side without distinction between enemy and allied. Although they could not communicate in words, they suffered the same pains and felt the same emotions, and so they exchanged cigarettes and shared a tangerine by halves. This is really a miracle of humanity. Takashi is always able to look at others, including the enemies, like humans, because he's looking for his humanity, for what fulfills his humanity. And that's how he's able to look at others, for the need that others wants to fulfill, the human claim of their heart. There's an episode, which is another of the things that I would like to tell you from his experience in war, which is really impressive. Here he understands what was the source of peace. There was a church in a city that they had just conquered, and all the Chinese people had escaped. And there was a church where an Italian priest was hiding something like 1,000 Chinese refugees who were hiding from the Japanese. Takashi arrives, and of course people are scared because he's a Japanese. Takashi takes out of his pocket the rosary and waves it. The moment people see that, they shout out in joy. Nagai goes into the church, and this is what happens inside. Moved by curiosity, children, women, and the elderly enter the church, and seeing Takashi praying, they got down on their knees all around him and began to chant litanies to the Blessed Virgin Mary with their beautiful accents. The beauty of that choir of hearts praying in unison made Takashi burst into tears, so much so that he ended up wetting the whole chain of his rosary. It was at that moment he realized, in a striking way, that the peoples of the world could be united. It was only in the person of Christ, capable of generating that unity in love, that it was possible to stop an incomprehensible war, a madness whereby strangers hated and killed each other. He understands that the true source of peace is the unity among people who recognize that they have the same heart in need for the same thing, which is eternity, which Christ can make possible. And one of the other things that he understands at the front is what is the purpose of life and the purpose of death. I don't want to die, cried a voice in Takashi's heart. I don't want to die in this meaningless way. If I have to die, I want to do it in a more humble and meaningful way. He prayed that his death would be quiet and meaningful. He wondered what it was worth giving his life for. At first, he claimed he wanted to die for his country. As he found himself on the battlefield, he came to realize that a small man like him could not make grandiose speeches for the fatherland or for anyone. But that in the end, it was good that he gave his life for a little friend, one of those poor, wounded soldiers. It's all about humanity. And it's impressive how in the war, Nagai is able to grasp every single spark of humanity. Look at how Takashi is able to look at the enemy. Takashi stood in the shade of a small fort, resting after he had finished treating the wounded. One of the servicemen brought him a large pomelo, which is a flute, that Takashi wanted to break in half and share with the captain soldier. Looking at him, he began to meditate. Who knows where this honest-looking young man is from? Who knows what he did for a living and what is his name? And now we find ourselves here sharing a pomelo. But why just a little while ago this man and I were fighting to kill each other? What on earth should I hate about this stranger? I have traveled thousands of miles by sea and mountain to come here. We were born thousands of miles apart, and until now, we have never had anything to do with each other. And just a few moments ago, one of us should have died. I just can't understand the meaning of war. The pomelo was delicious. It tasted like a fountain of life, with the aroma of the juice pervading the throat. The soldier lifted his gaze. It was the face of a young man. Takashi smiled, and the man smiled too. He had never in his life seen such a smile of love. This gaze at other people, this gaze at humanity, is what makes the Nagai different in the way he stands in those situations. And this is what he experienced directly in war. But Takashi had to experience something even worse, which is the atomic bomb, which happened in August 1945 at 11:02. And this is what the bomb produced in Nagasaki. And this is what was left of Murakami. The entire city had literally become ashes, as he was saying. This is Takashi at the epicenter of the explosion in Murakami. That city, rich in humanity, was now a lifeless hill, which no longer had any shadows. As I looked at it, I felt in my heart all the transience of human life and realized that all longing is meaningless. My beloved wife had died. My laboratory and my research had been destroyed. My house and all my possessions reduced to ashes. My health was gone, and I knew that soon I would no longer be able to work. Everything was lost. He understands that everything he had dedicated his life to, everything he had been relying on, has become ashes. Yet, as I was having these thoughts and my gaze strayed over the boundless wasteland that no longer had any shadows because everything was flat, I discovered with surprise that I felt neither regret nor sadness for having lost everything. What perishes, perishes. What dies, dies. Seeing the few remnants of all that was lost, I realized the foolishness of us men, obsessed with grasping things that die and struggling not to let them be taken away once they have been conquered. At that point, I felt liberated. When I realized that what I had to seek was something that does not die, when I realized that I had to seek the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, a new and great hope settled in my heart. This is the final moment, the definite moment when Nagai understands that he has to hang on something which does not perish, which does not die, which does not mean rejecting, neglecting things, but it means using things with that purpose. Relying to something that does not die means seeking the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. A whole life for ashes. He could not endure a life without meaning. He had to find that which does not perish. He had to cling to that which never dies. Time passes, space fades, living beings die. But we must live life in such a way that what does not perish, what does not die remains. Takashi had lost everything, but he was entering in his new life in search of what he could never lose. In a tiny hut in the middle of the windswept atomic heat, with two small children in his arms and a body he can no longer move as he would like, Takashi now leads his life in splendor. The one you see in the picture is the small hut, the Nyokodo, which he built in the middle of the atomic wasteland, because there, in the middle of the destruction and where that seemed to be the last word, he wanted to find what never dies. How can a man find what never dies in such situations? What does it mean, finding what never dies, seeking the kingdom of God? What does it mean, finding what is not destined to become ashes in those terrible conditions? These words are literally incredible. Here, Nagai is talking to the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Try to think, these people who had lost everything, had lost their most dear, and they had lost all their possessions, who have nothing left, they listen to him saying these words. 5 years have passed since then, and our peace movement has never stopped. We have continued unabated to shout loudly the value of that sacrifice. But come to think of it, have we not failed in something in all this? Was it not we, the survivors, who misappropriated the sacrifice of those hundreds of thousands who gave their lives in the atomic cloud to bring peace? In order to maintain the world peace that had been achieved by that sacrifice, another new sacrifice would be required. Prayers that ask for sacrifices without offering any of their own are just selfishness. The citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki pray for peace, but what did they personally offer as a sacrifice for it? Beginning today, we must make a sincere self-reflection and offer another new sacrifice, greater than that of the atomic bomb. Let it be the day of a new prayer. Let it be the sacrifice of changing ourselves. This is the source of true peace. Peace is not going in the public square and shouting against the others so that others change. That's not for him peace. Peace is me changing my heart. It's conversion. It's literally finding what never dies and hanging to that. Letting what is not necessary anymore go and just stick to what does not perish. And this is what this position, this human position, produces in the middle of the total destruction. The first thing I think every morning, as soon as I wake up, is that I'm happy. It is an achievement of recent times to surprise myself every morning in my bed, full of this expectation of joy before the day begins. I find myself having the heart of a child. We should turn our lives into poetry. We should let the poet's attentive and admiring gaze delve beneath the surface, and glimpse the beauty that is hidden in everything and shape our every action and thought. I have finally reached this new horizon. A child's heart is beating within my chest. The life of a new day awaits me, true joy, in this 2-meter bed from which I cannot even get out, but which is life without the lash of duties and the laces of prohibitions that stop the audacity of this heart that sets to work every morning again. You can understand why Nagai became a starting point for the entire city of Nagasaki for rebuilding, reconstructing, and finding new hope for life, because he was literally the only powerful source of life and hope in the total destruction. What's the secret of this human journey? Is the way he was able to face all the happenings of life, not as a misfortune, but as a step to his own conversion, to finding what never dies. This is what he says. What in the eyes of the world appears only as a misfortune, for the saints is a grace, the path to self-perfection. And this is why we believe that Takashi Nagai is a saint. And that's why we have founded the association Amici Takashi Midori Nagai. I invite you to visit the website and to accompany us in this journey. And if you're interested, you can find on Amazon these books. I really suggest that you should read the book Thoughts from Nyokodo, from where I took some of the quotations that I read today. Thank you it was a short description of a very deep and complicated journey, but I hope it was able to give a bit of a glimpse of it. Thank you very much.